I want to tell you about a building in Landstuhl, Germany. It is the largest American military hospital outside the United States. It has been there since 1953. It is where American soldiers go when they are too badly wounded to be treated in the field. It is where the airman who was shot down over Iran during this war was taken to save his life. That hospital is in Germany this week. As that airman was still recovering, the Pentagon announced it is withdrawing 5,000 troops from Germany because the mission changed, not because the threat environment changed, not because any military review concluded that 5,000 fewer troops in Europe serves American security interests, but because the Chancellor of Germany stood in front of a group of high school students and said something that Donald Trump did not. Leakers told those students, the Americans obviously have no strategy. This situation is ill-considered, and I do not see at the moment what strategic exit the Americans are choosing now, he said. America has no strategy, and within 72 hours the Pentagon announced the withdrawal. By the end of this video, I am going to show you exactly what those 5,000 troops actually do in Germany, what the base at Ramstein actually is, what NATO actually means in 2026, and then I want you to tell me whether what happened this week is a military decision or a temper tantrum with consequences that will outlast this presidency by decades. Before we continue, forthing subscribe to Respect B, because what I am about to tell you about what America is actually withdrawing from Germany, about what Ramstein Air Base is, about what this moment means for European security. This is the analysis that the press conference summaries are not providing. Subscribe and activate the bell so you hear it first. Share this video with one person in Europe, someone who deserves to understand that the security architecture that has kept their continent at peace for 80 years just experienced something that cannot be undone by a phone call between two leaders. Give it a like, because that gesture tells the algorithm that serious analysis of what is actually happening to the Western Alliance deserves a wider audience than the daily ceasefire update graphics. And leave a comment. Tell me where in the world you are watching from, your city, your country, because this story belongs to every person whose security has depended on an alliance that is now visibly breaking apart. No, let us examine what was actually announced this week and what it actually means. I want to begin with what most coverage of this story has not adequately explained. The 5,000 troops being withdrawn are not symbolic. They are not ceremonial guards or administrative personnel. They are a brigade combat team and associated forces, a deployable fighting unit with armored vehicles, artillery, and the full logistics infrastructure of American ground combat capability. Germany hosts approximately 35,000 U.S. troops, the largest number of any country in Europe, including critical training, logistics, and medical support. Tens of thousands more American civilians work alongside U.S. troops in Germany. The major installations include Ramstein Air Base, which hosts the headquarters of U.S. Air Forces in Europe and Africa, a key facility for operations in Europe, Africa, and the Middle East, and Landstuhl Regional Medical Center, the largest American hospital outside the United States. I want to be precise about what Ramstein Air Base actually represents in the architecture of American military power. It is not simply a base where American soldiers are stationed. It is the nerve center through which the United States projects military power across three continents: Europe, Africa, and the Middle East. When American forces strike targets in the Middle East, the communications and logistics often run through Ramstein. When wounded American soldiers need evacuation from any theater in the region, Landstuhl is where they go. When the U.S. needs to move troops, equipment, and supplies at speed across the Atlantic, Germany is the hub through which that movement flows. The decision does not appear to affect the U.S. military's massive medical support bases like Landstuhl, where thousands of troops, including those who have been injured during the war, have been taken for medical treatment. That clarification in paragraph 8 of the NBC News report is the kind of detail that changes the picture. Significantly, Landstuhl stays. Ramstein's headquarters function stays. What goes is a brigade combat team, but here is what that clarification does not address. The withdrawal of a brigade combat team from Germany does not happen in isolation. It happens in the context of a president who on the same week threatens similar withdrawals from Italy and Spain, who said Italy has not been of any help and Spain has been horrible, who has been systematically signaling to every European NATO ally that the American security commitment is conditional on political support for a war that NATO was never consulted about. That is the context in which 5,000 troops leaving Germany must be understood. As a military decision, as a message. Now let me examine what Friedrich Merz actually said, because the coverage has treated his statement as a diplomatic miscalculation, as though the problem was that he said it rather than that it is true. During his visit to a school in central Germany, Merz accused us officials of entering a war without a clear strategy, saying the whole affair is ill-considered, to say the least. The Iranians are obviously very skilled at negotiating, or rather, very skillful at not negotiating, letting the Americans travel to Islamabad and then leave again without any result. An entire nation is being humiliated by the Iranian leadership, especially by these so-called Revolutionary Guards. An entire nation being humiliated. I want to examine that statement carefully, not as a political judgment about Trump, but as a factual description of what has happened in this conflict. America set a deadline of April 6th. Iran did not comply. Nothing happened. America set a deadline of April 8th. Iran did not comply. America announced a ceasefire instead. America announced a ceasefire expiring April 22nd. Iran seized ships. America extended the ceasefire indefinitely. America sent a delegation to Islamabad. Iran submitted a proposal Trump called not good enough. The delegation did not go. Iran sent a better proposal. 10 minutes later, the delegation still did not go. America announced the naval blockade as a pressure tool. Iran seized more ships. The blockade continued. Iran called it a ceasefire violation. Nothing changed. That is the factual record. Merz looked at that record and described it as humiliation. Trump responded by posting online, "The Chancellor of Germany, Friedrich Merz, thinks it's okay for Iran to have a nuclear weapon. He doesn't know what he's talking about." Trump added it was no surprise that Germany is doing so poorly, both economically and in other respects. Wave speedy. Germany doing poorly economically? I want to pause on that because Germany's economic difficulties in 2026 are directly connected to the Iran war that Merz criticized. The Strait of Hormuz closure has elevated German energy costs, contributed to the growth forecast being cut in half, forced Lufthansa to cancel 20,000 flights. Germany is doing poorly economically in part because of the war that Trump launched without consulting Germany, and is now using Germany's economic difficulties to dismiss Germany's criticism of that war. That is a circle that I find difficult to characterize as anything other than extraordinary. I want to spend some time on what NATO actually is, because I think the phrase NATO is breaking gets used so frequently that it has lost its meaning, and restoring its meaning is essential for understanding what this week's withdrawal actually represents. NATO was created in 1949. It was created in response to a specific historical lesson, the lesson of the 1930s, that democracies which retreat from collective security arrangements, which allow the strongest among them to act unilaterally and expect the others to follow or be left behind, produce the conditions for catastrophic war. The foundational logic of NATO is simple: an attack on one member is an attack on all, and the presence of American troops in Germany is not charity or sentiment, it is the physical embodiment of that commitment. American soldiers in Germany are there so that any adversary contemplating aggression against a NATO member has to calculate that they are not attacking Germany or France or Poland. They are attacking the United States. That calculation, that certainty, is what has kept Europe at peace for 80 years. NATO said it is working with the U.S. to understand the details of their decision on force posture in Germany. The process, the Pentagon estimates, will unfold over the next 6 to 12 months, working to understand NATO. The alliance that America built and has led for 8 decades is working to understand a decision that the United States made about troops stationed in the alliance's most important European member state. That sentence tells you something about the current state of the relationship that no official statement will say. Direct friction between European leaders and the Trump administration has intensified due to the war with Iran, which the U.S. launched without notifying most NATO allies. The president has also lashed out at allies for what he sees as insufficient help in the conflict, threatening to cut troop levels in Italy and Spain without notifying most NATO. At least this is the sentence that I believe is the key to understanding everything that has followed. The Iran war was launched without informing the alliance that America built. The countries that have stood beside the United States in every major conflict since 1949 were not told that a war was beginning that would close the Strait of Hormuz, elevate their energy prices, disrupt their supply chains, and require them to choose between supporting an American action they had no part in deciding and facing the accusation that they are not loyal allies. That is not alliance management, that is unilateralism wearing the costume of alliancian. The withdrawal of 5,000 troops from Germany this week is not the cause of NATO's fracture. It is the symptom of a fracture that began on February 28 when the bombs fell without a phone call to Brussels. I want to tell you about one specific consequence of this week's announcement that I have not seen reported anywhere. The airman who was shot down over Iran during this war, whose name has not been publicly released, was treated at Landstuhl Regional Medical Center in Germany. He was treated there because Landstuhl is the largest American military hospital outside the United States, because it has the specialized trauma care that battlefield injuries require, because it is 6,000 miles closer to the war zone than any comparable American facility. The Pentagon announcement this week specified that Landstuhl is not part of the withdrawal the hospital stays, but here is what the announcement did not address. The brigade combat team being withdrawn includes the soldiers who provide force protection for Ramstein and Landstuhl, the military police, the perimeter security, the quick reaction forces that ensure the safety of the installations, and the signal that the withdrawal sends to every wounded American soldier who will be medevaced to Landstuhl in the coming months of this war is that the political relationship between the United States and the host nation of their hospital is being managed through public feuds and troop withdrawals announced in response to a speech at a German high school. I have spent for decades watching how military decisions and political decisions intersect, and I want to say something directly. The decision to withdraw 5,000 troops from Germany was made in response to a statement by a German leader who said America has no strategy in Iran. The statement was made to high school students. The response was a Pentagon order affecting 5,000 military families, the security architecture of the European continent, and the 80-year credibility of an alliance that has kept peace in Europe longer than any arrangement in the continent's modern history. Those are not equivalent acts. One is a speech. The other is a strategic decision with consequences measured in decades. There is a building in Landstuhl, Germany, the largest American military hospital outside the United States. It has been there since 1953. It is where the airmen shot down over Iran came to recover. This week, the Pentagon announced it is withdrawing 5,000 troops from Germany, not because of a military review, not because of a strategic reassessment, not because the threat environment in Europe has changed, because a German chancellor said America has no strategy in a war that America launched without telling Germany it was starting. I have spent for decades studying how alliances hold together and how they come apart. And I want to say something directly. Alliances do not break in a single moment, they break through an accumulation of moments in which the cost of maintaining them exceeds the political will to absorb that cost. The moment NATO was not notified before the Iran war began was one such moment. The moment European allies were asked to help enforce a blockade they had no part in imposing was another. The moment Trump called Italy unhelpful and Spain horrible was another, and this week's withdrawal announcement is another. None of these moments alone breaks an 80-year alliance, but they accumulate. And what I observed this week in the Pentagon announcement, in NATO's statement that it is working to understand the details, in Merz's careful insistence that his personal relationship with Trump remains good while the institutional relationship visibly fractures, is an alliance that has absorbed one too many of these moments. Whether it has absorbed the last one, that is the question that the next several months will answer. This is Respect. Tell me in the comments where in the world you are watching from today.